Yeah. So again, I think you're referencing a point that when you look at companies like McLaren, and we had Williams here yesterday, talking about the extension of that technology into other things. You know, Williams were talking about aero, where they're putting aero on fridges to recirculate the cold air in to make them more efficient. Things that are nothing to do with glamorous, expensive race cars, to your point, about how that technology feeds out into the greater industry.
Absolutely. For example, we have made a wheelchair battery that gives disabled people in wheelchairs 10 times more range than their original battery, and instead of replacing a lead acid battery every year, you can keep the same battery for 10 years, so not wasting this, creating this huge amount of waste, toxic waste every year. So from a 2,000 horsepower supercar to a wheelchair and everything in between, it's applicable.
I've got some friends in wheelchairs, so can they go 0 to 60 in 1.8 seconds?
Theoretically.
That would be fun. I've been very greedy because I've been asking all the questions, but forgive me for that, being a bit of a fanboy. Are there any questions in the audience that we've got handheld mic? Anyone who wants to ask anything? I'm more than happy to carry on asking questions, but if anyone's got something, anybody? Yeah, is there one over there?
Hi. Hi, I just wanted to ask a question, and obviously you're so inspiring, your whole story is incredible. Can you take me through a little bit of the design process behind the motor, and what are some of the largest, like the biggest problems you have or you face when designing it?
For the motor particularly? Well, power density is a big topic, so for us it's the #1 topic. So there are, I think, some very interesting designs that the engineers have come up with, and I think it's possible to make them, but then in the end to actually produce that's I think quite a challenge with all the production processes, and to get that into some kind of scalable production, that's I think a big challenge. Then what else? I would say that it's also the whole system, like I mentioned before. We can't anymore look at the motor on its own. I think the motor is quite I think the powertrain really needs to be looked at as a whole. So the inverter, motor, and gearbox, together with the battery in terms of voltage, has to be looked at as one single unit. Also because of now silicon carbide technology, which has some impact on the windings of the motor, on the insulation and so on, which is also a challenge. So another challenge is that the DVDT, right? I'm not sure if I'm saying the right thing. So I'm the CEO of the company. I'm not so much involved in the development anymore. But I think these two factors, so basically getting the great ideas of the engineers into production, and looking and integrating the whole system as much into one unit, and making the trade-offs between gearbox, motor, and inverter, because you have to make trade-offs. So where do you trade off? Where do you reduce the weight and complexity? Do you reduce the weight in the active material in the motor, or you reduce the active material in the gearbox? Do you have more torque on the motor but then have one gear instead of, or you have 2 gears or 3 gears but less active material in the motor and the inverter and so on. So these are lots of challenges that you have to take on from a vehicle standpoint, and I think it's really difficult to develop, let's say, a car that, a high performance car that is not going like a trickle down from the top vehicle perspective, from the top vehicle requirements to the component requirements. If you just look at the motor itself or the powertrain itself without the whole vehicle requirements, how much the tires can actually bring to the road, how much torque, how much traction they have, what the weight distribution of the car is, how long the battery can sustain the discharge, and so on. So I really think it's important to have this whole vehicle vision in the head of the people working on it, understanding every impact of every choice, the impact of every choice you make on the whole vehicle.
Wonderful. Do you want to pick one of those questions?
Okay, so one easy one, how much of the business is engineering services versus selling supercars? 1/3 is supercars, 1/3 is the components. So it's not just engineering, but also components. We don't sell engineering hours, but our result is a system. what is the charging system for the C2? So we have a 22 kilowatt onboard charger and up to 250 kilowatt DC combo fast charger. So with that we can recharge in 35 minutes, I think, from 0 to 85% state of charge. What can you tell us about the strategy of the Porsche partnership? Well, the strategy is that we help them to develop their future products.
Taycan, isn't it? The Taycan.
Well, that's a little bit too far already. That's
Okay, yeah.
pretty much the development for that car is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's soon going to go on the market,
Yeah.
but there's lots of other projects, so especially in the very high performance projects, on the tricky ones, and that we also hopefully supply the components in their production for, especially for niche, and in automotive terms, niche is everything below 20,000 units per year. So
Yeah.
that's quite big for us. And on the other side, they will help us with the production lines and production facilities and so on.
Yeah.
When this